Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to this month's Do Book Conversation. This month, we're talking about Do Death with Amanda and Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death with Salena. So, Amanda and Salena, welcome. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Lovely to be here. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So, do say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from. As always, we'll have 10 minutes at the end for questions, so you can pitch in your own questions. You're probably wondering what sort of a conversation it's going to be about. Well, it's going to be an authentic conversation. It's going to be full of life and love, as well as conversations about death. Because the two are different sides of the same coin, aren't they? But ultimately, why we want to have this conversation, and this is a conversation I have been looking forward to having ever since we started the book club. When Miranda and I first started the conversations, I said we've got to feature Do Death, because it's not one of those books that you necessarily pick up in the bookshop, but there's so much important stuff within these tiny slim pages that I hope you've really enjoyed us featuring it this month. I hope you've already had a chance to have a read. And so if anything has particularly struck you from the book, do let us know in the chat, because that would be really interesting. But yeah, it's going to be a great conversation. When it's not going to be maudlin. We might touch on some difficult subjects. It might get difficult, I have to be honest. I'm dealing with some stuff at the moment. My elderly mum is getting quite poorly. Yesterday, she told me she thought she was dying. Today, she's had me hunting around her apartment looking for a lost hearing aid. So ups and downs. But this is stuff that we're all dealing with. I'm sure you'll hear how we're all dealing with it. But it is live, and that particularly about such a sensitive issue, it might be a bit different tonight. But we want to make space to share this with you all as well. So do feel free to share. If there's still conversations to have, we might run on a little bit after 8 o'clock. We don't want to just wrap up and send everyone off home if we're deep in conversation. We shall see where we get to. Okay, right, Amanda.
Yeah.
What a fabulous book. You obviously spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about death. But I wondered if you could remember back to the first time that you realized that life had an end date. Can you go that far back?
Probably when my cat died, actually. That's a slightly random answer, but I guess, having pets as a child, and then they get run over, on the road that we lived on. That was quite a shocking thing for me. But also, I think if you're a child and you've got animals, it's it's also a, well, I say gentle. Obviously, they were in a, on the road, but it just became part of life, I guess, when we lost a cat or a budgie. My mum was very fond of budgies, and we had lots of them. And when they didn't live very long, that was really my first memory. And then my mum, interestingly, had an obsession with cemeteries, and she used to take us around cemeteries rather than playgrounds. And we didn't have a lot of money. She was a single mom, so that was something that she used to do. She used to take us around to look at all the sort of epitaphs, and actually they were quite, it sounds really morbid, but cemeteries can be quite beautiful and very peaceful. And as children, we'd run around, and it felt very normal to us. I think my mum gave us a very gentle introduction to death by taking us around the cemeteries, and we were fascinated by all the tombstones and all the engravings and all the names and the dates. And yeah, it was really interesting, actually. So that's, for me, that was it really sticks in my head. So I think it was a very gentle and gradual process into my understanding of death. And I'm grateful to my mom, even though people think it's probably a bit weird. It seems very normal to me, and seemed very normal to my mom.
That's fab.
Yeah.
I love the wandering around graveyards. I have to confess, I do exactly the same. In fact, I was in our local graveyard only the other day, and I came across the first gravestone where the inscription begins by saying, "Reader, as you stand." What is it? I even wrote it down. It said, not particularly for this, just because it struck me. It said, "Whoever thou art that standeth pensively over this inscription, let it make upon thee a lasting impression." And just this voice from beyond the grave speaking from an inscription, it really grabbed hold of me in a way that I've not often come across with inscriptions. And I spend an inordinate amount of time in graveyards reading gravestones.
What's your favourite graveyard?
Genuinely, it would be our local graveyard, because there's so much in there. There's a couple who died in the late 1700s, and they were 97 and 99, bizarrely, in the 1700s, and they died within a week of each other. So one had obviously gone, and the other one just gave up. And it's just beautiful. But it's a kind of rambling and overgrown sort of place, and it's the sort of place that you can uncover new stories and new histories all the time. Go on, Salena. What about you? Do you like a graveyard?
Oh yeah, no, yes, I really do have a favourite graveyard. This is one of my favourite topics, actually. I think one of my favourite graveyards is a graveyard that's down near Foy in Cornwall, and it's the graveyard where, hang on, I've lost the name, author of Rebecca.
Daphne du Maurier?
Yeah, Daphne du Maurier. It's where she got married, and it's a tiny, tiny little church. It's got an amazing graveyard, and it's all overgrown. It's got war heroes in it, and that's where I wrote one of the chapters from Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death. Just like watching the sunrise, sitting in that graveyard. I've got a real fondness for it. I really do. I think it's beautiful. But yeah, I've always been drawn to sitting in graveyards, just listening and feeling. And yeah, there's something about graveyards that was very soft. Yeah.
It makes it sort of tangible, doesn't it? In this strange intangible thing that happens to us all, that none of us really want to grapple with. Do you find, did you take inspiration from graveyards then? So then, I'm interested in how you came to see death as a character that you could speak to and bring to life in your book.
I think there's loads of answers to that, but I think the when I was thinking what kind of topics we might talk about, I think that my grandmother really instilled in me this idea that there's more to life than this. Like, so bedtime was quite crowded. So you've got Father Christmas watching if you're good, you've got God watching if you're good, and you've got all your ancestors and deads at the end of the bed. I mean, it's no surprise I was quite scared of the dark. It was like quite a lot of an audience when you're trying to go to sleep and you've got a massive imagination. And so this kind of idea that, that your ancestors and your dead are with you was very much installed from my Jamaican grandmother. And so when I was writing Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death, I think very much that it's my favorite ancestor is my grandmother's grandmother, and her name was Mama, and she had this incredible lineage that goes right back to the Moors in Spain and the Maroons and fighting for freedom and this real. And she wore a bandana and she smoked a clay pipe. And she couldn't read or write, but she knew all the plants. And she was, I suppose, what we would call a healer now, or a herbalist. And if someone was born, she'd be there as a midwife, or if someone was dying, something like a death doula, I imagine. She was there, and this big sort of character. There was always a black and white photo of her next to my grandmother's bed and next to my mother's bed. And I remember very vividly sitting on the end of the bed and always being like, and who's that? And wanting to hear stories about her. So when I was started writing this book, I really feel like there's a lot of her in there. The idea of death as a medicine woman, or death as and I started writing Mrs. Death's lullabies and imagining what conversations would be with someone that didn't fill you with fear as the Grim Reaper might, but someone that's more like a gentle, wise sort of feeling. So I think that's where some of it was built on. or came from.
Hmm.
And I think that's because I wanted to ask about why you characterize Mrs. Death as opposed to the Grim Reaper, and I kind of got the sense that it was a different storytelling device that wasn't quite so hackneyed or stereotypical, that could draw people in a different way than that spectre with the scythe.
Yeah, but I think as well, like, I mean, it comes from a very genuine place of loss and hurt. And there was a run of funerals, and I lost some really big people in my sort of family, like my family tree, and great friends as well. And then in the bigger world out there, we lost Bowie and Prince and Leonard Cohen and all these heroes. And it was all around that time. And then really huge traumas and tragedies like Grenfell. So there seemed to be a lot of death around and surrounding in my small little world, and then in the outer world. So yeah, so to have conversations about that, or to that, or to speak on it, I didn't want to speak to some faceless, Grim Reaper with the, I wanted, so I suppose it was a need and something that I wanted to do for my own healing, perhaps, as well as my own imagination and creativity. One of the first lines, or one of the first strong pieces of her, were "I know a lot of dead people now." It just as in the book, the character Wolf meets Mrs. Death along Brick Lane, and here's this line: "I know a lot of dead people now. I know a lot of dead people now." And I wrote that as a fiction, but it did actually happen to me, and it was Christmas time, and I'm walking along Brick Lane, and I feel like, and I actually stood there, like, but there was nobody there. It was just a very strong new character, and I walked all the way from Brick Lane, all down through East London, past the mosque, down towards Bow Road, all the way, just writing and writing and writing, and recording in my phone and typing into my phone. And that whole chapter of that book just came out in one chunk. And then it was from there that it was, well, who knows the most dead people? And it was like death would know the most dead people. And that's kind of one of the building blocks of that character.
Wow. You want to read us a little bit? I'd love to hear you giving Mrs. Death voice.
Sure. Actually, maybe because I've just mentioned that, I'll read a little bit from that chapter. So this was me. It was about this time of year. So it's like Christmassy time, and everyone's going nuts for Christmas, and you're just not really feeling it. Oh yeah, no. Actually, I'll do it the other way around. See. Hang on. I march on through Whitechapel Market. The incense burns. I smell pushka rose and sweet sandalwood. The stalls sell silver rings and dangly earrings and bangles and a million colourful silks, leather bags and knock-off phones. Special price, quick sale for Christmas Eve. A man shouts, special price, special price. Everything's so shiny. Crackers and tinsel and fairy lights. Flash, flashing lights, flash. People are in a mania of last minute bargains. Buy, selling. Everything is going to be okay. Christmas lights flash and shine in the architecture above and glitter in the puddles of the dirty gutters. Distant church bells ring. London is all Christmas Eve and goodwill to all men and ho, ho, ho. I continue to walk down a bustling commercial road. Thick traffic, buses and taxis filled with passengers carrying shopping bags and consumed with panic and madness. They bite their nails. I can see them all thinking, Christmas will be ruined if we don't get some figgy plum rum bakes. Don't forget the reindeer brandy butter pies. Last minute shop. How could we forget the artisan cream puff spangles? We have them every year. It's not proper Christmas without the deep fried pork whip nutmeg balls. Quick, shop, consume. Wait, what was that? I feel as though someone is there. In fact, I feel sure I'm not alone. Suddenly it occurs to me it isn't my hangover walking with me, but someone. I'm not alone at all. Somebody is with me. I stop walking and listen again. I turn my head and hear something. It's like a buzzing, a vibration echoing back to me and itself. I put my hands out, some cold air. There is something. Someone else is there, something. Someone touches me, cold air on my cheek, their fingers. A small hand brushes my hand. Slight light, the weight of a spider's web. There and not there. I stand dead still and try to look normal and nod my head as if I'm having a normal thought. So nobody will see me holding hands with the air or someone or something that is or isn't there. London is carrying on being London. That part is normal, nothing to see here. The traffic is being the traffic and the noise is the noise. But here I am by Bow Road tube station and I'm frozen to the spot, holding hands with the wind and with nothing that feels like it is here. And it is everything. There is nothing to see. Nobody there. But there is. Here she is. I know a lot of dead people. I know a lot of dead.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Salena. It's lovely to hear you read it. I think it's a really good way in as well to have a conversation about death through this fictional character, because we do find it such a big taboo in this modern Western world. And Amanda, it strikes me that it's that taboo that you're trying to work through and trying to get past the fact that we don't like talking about death.
Exactly, yeah. And I thank you, by the way, Salena. That was so fantastic. It makes me want to. Is there an audio version of the book?
Yeah, that was the only gig I did in 2020. It was to go out in a taxi to a recording studio in King's Cross and record the audio book. I loved it. I
What
really
fun!
enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's such fun.
Yeah.
And it creates a completely different image in my head. Obviously, because I'm reading it. When you read it in your own voice, but to hear it in the author's voice, it's lovely. It's so nice to hear that. And I'll come back to your question in a minute, Tim, but also to say, when you were reading that, it made me think that, you know, when you walk down those sort of places like Brick Lane, and how you were saying, you know, Wolf is aware of death there. Well, it's kind of like that, isn't it? When you walk around old places, you get the feeling of the history and the people that would have walked along those cobbled streets, and you think, you know, that's the people that have gone before us. And it's pretty intense. Sometimes it feels pretty intense, doesn't it, that that you can feel that, you can almost feel that. But yes, going back to your question, Tim, I was volunteering in a hospice, and the idea that I was just going to do that a couple of days a week, and I just observing, you know, part of my role was to go in the inpatient unit, where most people don't have very long. They have about 2 weeks left, and funnily enough, people didn't want to volunteer in that particular department, so I did. And my job was just to go in and mainly listen to people. And what I observed is that, even, you know, hospices are amazing places, but even people in the hospice, some of them didn't really talk about death to the people that were dying, and I found that quite disturbing. And I thought, I wonder what I could do to create more of a conversation. And then that's where it all came about, and I did the talk, and I created the website, and obviously I'm doing the podcasts, and, you know, just trying to find ways of opening up this conversation. Because what I realized was, when I was in the hospice, coming out of the hospice, I felt really glad to be alive. And I felt really, it was almost like my senses were heightened coming out of the hospice in a different way than they had been before, because I came out and I felt very grateful that I was okay. And that had a really profound effect on me. And I think that realization that we are living and we need to make the most of our lives really was at the forefront of my mind, being at the hospice. So that's where it all started to make sense for me a little bit more, and then it sort of happened very organically from there. Yeah, very weird. I sort of never imagined doing this, or even thinking about wanting to do something like this. Just sort of happened.
But that's life, isn't it? Life
Yeah.
and you respond to it, and you react, and you go where it takes you. I think it's powerful. Salena, did you think that the book would open up conversations? Was that one of the things you were trying to do with it?
What did I think that the book would open up conversations? Yes, I did. I didn't write it I mean, I think I wrote it very boldly because when I was writing it, I didn't have an agent or a book deal or anything. So it was very much something that I was writing, getting up at 4 in the morning and writing for myself and pushing myself to do, and then doing the paid work and doing my gigs and things, in the rest of the day. So getting up at 4 in the morning to have that time, to carve that time to finish this sort of secret project. I've always got secret projects going on. I like it. It's like, whoa, what are you doing? Not telling you. But so it was kind of like that. And it was a very long write. I started it. I've got notebooks that go back as far as 2011. So I think, knowing me the way I know myself, I think the day I handed in Springfield Road, I started working on this because that's about the right time frame. So it's like, I don't like people to have my newest thing. So if I've got something in submission, then I'll be working on something else. So if people hate the thing, then I've got another new thing which I will be liking more because it's the new thing. That is how I think. It's ridiculous, isn't it? But yeah. So Springfield. Yeah. So it's been a long ride, in gathering and writing and building these characters of time and life and death and how they work together. And I was just, I don't think I can ever really sort of put into words just what it was to publish this book during a pandemic, in lockdown, with my partner going into chemotherapy, and with big family traumas and really scary things going on, in my personal life as well as in the big wide world. I wrote this book with the other pandemics that were going on, a pandemic of apathy, or pandemic of violence to women, or a pandemic of greed and corruption and war and all these other things that were going on. I had no idea well, how would I, that this like very scary coronavirus pandemic would happen, and I'd have to publish the book under such duress and in such a strange and bewildering way, and also not being able to use my super skill of talking and meeting people and hugging people and running around drinking in pubs and and doing what I like to do, and drinking rum and jumping on tables because we're all in lockdown. So I had to do a lot of it like this in Zoom talks, and it was amazing. But I found so many incredible people because we were doing everything on Zoom and like this. It meant I was joining in with talks with, like, for example, the queer death stories in California, and meeting people like yourself, Amanda, and death doulas and death midwives and counselors and death cafe people. And I just found this hive, this whole thing under the hashtag positive death movement or death positive movement. I didn't know about any of this when I was writing the book. It was incredible, and the support that I've had from that community has been incredible. Yeah, really, I'm really grateful for that. That was quite a rant. Sorry. I haven't talked all day.
How did you? I mean, how did you? What? How? I was curious to think. How was it received by a publisher or an agent when you approached them? Because obviously it was pandemic. It was very brave of them to then say, yeah, we're gonna be behind this book about death.
It was before the pandemic, so it would have been around 2018, right just before it. It would have been around 2018 when I went to Ireland and I went and stayed in this prison tower. I went to stay in Bill Drummond's prison tower because I decided it that I really wanted to scare myself and to face fear. Because I think when you're writing about death, you are talking about fear, is a big part of it. And to get out of my night, this is my writing room, and get out of this room and go and be on my own in the big disused sort of prison tower in Northern Ireland, and roam around the coast of Ireland and on my own, and feel that solitude and fear. And yeah, so during that year, I bravely let Radio 4 follow me for a year. They were following me while I was writing this novel, and so I was doing little bits of reading this book in poetry gigs, and also going down to Whitstable and writing with my friend Peter Coit and writing the songs that go with this book. There's a whole album, there's a whole soundtrack which I haven't shared yet, and sort of and sort of working with all of that, and it's very brave of me. If Radio 4, let's hang on. If Radio 4 said to me now, "Hi, Stina, what novel are you working on? Can we follow you and listen to your first rough drafts?" I'd be like, "No way!" But I was just so, I didn't think it. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have a publishing deal. I was like, "Hell, why not? It might not even see the light of day." So that became a Radio 4 documentary, and people really liked it. And that was the little bit of confidence I needed to then go and get an agent, and then an agent obviously got me my deal with Canongate, who were the first people to ever publish me back in 1998. It's become a lovely full circle, and it was beautiful. It's beautiful to be there and with them, and yeah, and then that's how it all happened. It's crazy.
Amazing.
Yeah, but a lot of this book and the deaths and the grieving and the stories and the fiction and the fact are things that were happening in real time, and I felt very led by the nose. I'm saying this because when I was talking about Ireland, like the day I arrived, I found I hadn't taken enough books. You never take enough books. There's not enough room in your suitcase. So I went and signed up to this tiny, tiny little village library that was only open to like 2 afternoons a week, to go inside to have more books to read. And I made friends with a librarian. Librarians are always best. And all the local papers were out, and there on the front page of the newspaper, it was the 30th anniversary of the disappearance of Inga Maria Hauser, who's the German hitchhiker. It's the biggest murder of like unsolved crime, and she had been murdered in the forest very close to the tower. So of course, next thing you know, I'm researching Inga, and I start writing. So and a lot of the book was like that. It was stories that I was finding as I was going along, and things that were that were coming to me as I was making the work, with no idea what would happen to it. It was very much a trust your instincts, trust your intuition feeling with this one. Yeah.
I love how at the end of the book, Salena, like, the last sort of lines. I don't want to ruin it for people, but so maybe I won't say the last lines, but just to say that there's a real sort of full circle in your book to come back to love and life. And when I was writing my book, by the end of it, I was like, well, really writing about death is really writing about love and writing about life. And the reason why death is so hard for us all is because of how much we love the people that the sort of intensity of our grief and the intensity of our emotions is about how much we love the people that die and disappear from our lives. Even you were saying, Bowie and Prince, those are people that have been present in our lives, and we may have loved their music, and we may have just got used to having them there, and then suddenly they're gone, and you're like, oh shit, death is real.
I think with heroes, isn't it? It's not, you don't have to know someone to grieve someone. I think with heroes, it's what their music meant to you, or their certain songs will signify big moments in your life, or in the memories that conjures. Music is like a time machine in that way, isn't it?
I guess even like the Queen, I'm not a real royalist, but just knowing that she was there as a sort of figurehead was, it's annoying for a lot of people, but not annoying for some people, but also just, but then she was very old, and I kind of felt relieved for her you know, finally she can have a bloody rest. You know, she's just sort of constantly working, and
Definitely
you
put
know,
the hours
there was a
in.
lot of that in there as well. So yeah, I think seeing death in the public eye is, I guess, preparing us for deaths within our own family and friends also. But you know, I think it was Nick Cave, and actually I don't know whether it was the Queen that said it first or Nick Cave. I think the Queen might have nicked it from Nick Cave, because I saw it with him first. I'm sure he wrote it, and then but it was he said, you know, grief is equal to the amount of love that we feel, and then that's always stayed with me because it's so true, and it's the price that we pay for love is you know, is the grief that we have.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much grief and so much, you know, I mean, this last 3 or 4 years, no messing up. It has been, I don't know anyone that's had a really easy time of it, whether really super personal stuff or, you know, yeah, it's just been really, really full on. And then bigger things like, you know, eco grief and grief for what's going on with the planet. I mean, you know, there was what was it, 6 mile queue for the Queen. I would definitely join a queue for all the animals and all the extinctions that are happening. That is a queue I would join. A queue for the last, you know, the last rhino, the last elephants. That's my queue. Yeah. Sorry, bringing it down a bit, but yeah, yeah.
But this is the point, though, isn't it? It is that these difficult subjects, this grief, it's there to transport us into understanding what's important, and to give a lens on what we've got now, and help us be grateful for that. And I think that's what both of your books just do wonderfully, is bring our future into our present, and kind of take you by the scruff of the neck, and it shakes you around a bit and goes, this is going to happen to you. What's your response? How do you respond to that? And you've clearly both been through that yourselves, come out the other side, and now we're going around shaking other people by the metaphoricals.
It's funny because I did I'm a life coach as well as an end of life doula, and when I was on the course, there was lots of sort of 20-year-olds, and you have to do some training with each other, and I had this really lovely guy called Claude, and you know, he was a really, really sort of cool guy, and he was doing all these amazing things, and you know, I'd often say to him, you know, Claude, you can always bring it back to death, you know, and he was like, well, I've just split up from my girlfriend, and I was going, so you've had complications in your relationship? And he was like, yes. I said, it will be about death in some way. And it turns out her dad had died when she was younger, and it had made her feel this sense of abandonment, and that was taken through her relationships. And then he said to me, oh my God, you're right, her dad died, and you know, we have these issues in our relationship. And I was like, you know, lots of things can be traced back to how we dealt with death, how we dealt with, you know, situations on life around. But I'm not talking about even physical death. It can be death of a relationship, or it could be death of a, you know, change in job. Those are all mini griefs that we have, and it's really important that we acknowledge that also. You know, it's everything changes constantly, everything moves along constantly, and everything's impermanent, and it's that sort of Buddhist idea that everything is in constant flux, and we have to, as humans, we have to move with that and adapt to that, and that can be quite discombobulating a lot of the time, to just keep up with that emotionally. You know, it's hard work, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's part of life as well, isn't it?
But especially in a society that doesn't really allow us to grieve very effectively.
No.
I think we seem to have forgotten that, don't we?
Yeah, and I think we're always in a rush to get somewhere, or to do something, or to be someone, or you know, and sometimes we just need to have a bit of self-care and a bit of self-nurture, and grief is, and that applies to grief as well. When you're grieving, you've just got to give yourself that time to grieve, and that could be for the rest of your life, and work out how to incorporate that into your normal life so that you can still experience joy and be happy and not feel guilty for enjoying life, even though someone that you love dearly has died. It's just finding a way, finding a path through that so that you can still experience joy alongside the other stuff that happens to us, you know, because life is so complex and multifaceted, and we need to just learn how to deal with those things better. And that means that the sort of the darkest emotions that we think are the darkest emotions, and they are really hard to go there, but sometimes the most amazing transformation can come out of those darkest moments and fears, you know, like Selena's book. Yeah, I think it, you know, you could talk about it for hours. I mean, I could talk about it for hours, because it's, you know, I think a lot of the time people don't want to talk about death, but I think it's also because they don't want to talk about their life. You know, acknowledging that one day we're going to die means also thinking, well, what are we going to do in this time period before then? And we don't know when that's going to be. And in the Death Cafe that I run, there's a really nice poem that somebody gave me, and it's called The Dash. It's a bit cheesy, but I like the idea of it. You know, like we go back to the tombstones, and there's, you know, there's the date that you're born, and there's the date that someone's died, and it's on the tombstone. And the poem's about the sort of line in the middle, and people don't really think about the line in the middle, like what's happened between the birth and the death. And it's a really beautiful poem. You should look it up. It's called The Dash.
Love that. That's gorgeous.
Yeah, and it really made me think about, yeah, that's the whole point. We've got these 2 dates, one of which we don't know when that's going to be, but it's like, what do we do with the time in between that? How can we best live in that dash? And that's what I'm really interested in. But I think, in a way, the dash becomes more, comes to the forefront of your mind when you think about the end. You know, it makes you go backwards. And that's partly why I did the life coaching, because I really thought, actually, I need to go right back before people are dying to go, well, what do you want to do with your life? And how do you want to live? And what do you want more of? What is that? You know, one of the biggest questions in life coaching is, what do you want more of? And asking people, what do you want more of? And that's just such a simple question, but maybe one we don't give ourselves enough to think about that. What do we really want in life, and how are we going to achieve that? And it might be just more gardening, you know, or more reading, or more baths, or whatever, you know. Could be something really simple, but do we give ourselves the time and the place to think about those things? So I'm really interested in that, tied up with this idea of talking with death.
And you, Salena, you've got a lovely phrase where we talked in the book about how different we might be if we walked around with our end date stamped on our foreheads. I love that. We've used that a couple of times in the material. I'm guessing that came to you in reflection as you're going through the book and thinking about how you're gonna make it real for people. Is that right?
That particular line, yeah, imagining if we had our dates or our expiry dates on our forehead as if we were pints of milk, and how different we would be, and how different we would live, and how different people would treat us. But then it's not really true, because then when you know when someone's really sick, when you know someone's going, when you perhaps might be impatient, or you might, if you were really honest, you might. And that's what I say, isn't it? That in the book, that's what Mrs. Death says. I mean, yeah, this idea that perhaps that wouldn't work either if we had our expiry dates on our forehead. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't like to know. I wouldn't like my expiry date on my forehead. Would you like yours? No.
I think people would treat you quite differently. Maybe they'd, I don't know.
Yeah, be really scary, actually.
By the way, has anyone seen the new Chris Hemsworth documentary called Limitless on Disney? And it's the end one, which I didn't watch the other one, so I'll have to go backwards now. But the end one was all about death, and it's very bizarre because he dresses up. He has all this costume made so that he's weighted as if he's an older person, and they put him in this sort of fake retirement home to experience what it's like to be very elderly, and it's really amazing what happens to him. It's really, really interesting. But he was saying, you know, the way that people talk to the elderly is really patronizing. The way that people were talking to him, he said, you know, why are people talking to me like I'm an idiot because I'm an elder, because I'm, you know, sort of seen as an elderly person now. And it's just very interesting. I was just thinking about, you know, having the date stamped on your head, you know, with older people, because people think maybe they're going to die soon, maybe they treat them differently. And I've always felt that's a bit sad, you know. Older people are just us in, you know, in a few years' time. So I guess it's thinking, how would we want to be spoken to? I'd still want to have a laugh and talk about all sorts of things. I wouldn't want to talk about soup. Well, obviously we'd like to eat, you know, maybe we can have a soup, but you know what I mean is, it's just really sad that to think that, you know, we forget the elderly as well, and we treat them very differently. And I think that's something I'm very fascinated with. And I think that might be because my mum used to work in a care home, and you know, she didn't have babysitting, so she used to take us to work sometimes and just leave us running around the corridors, you know, getting money off people. And I really loved having those conversations with the, you know, these very old people when I was 6, and I found them really fascinating. Really fascinating.
I remember I had a cleaning job in an old people's home when I was a teenager. I used to quite like it.
Yeah.
To them and serve them their food. One of those sort of Sunday jobs, weekend jobs, you know, when you're for my cider and cigarette money.
It's like a treasure trove of amazing stories and advice and information, and you know, it's amazing, and it's I think it's very untapped.
Yeah,
definitely.
Anyway, so I was digressing then.
No. Well, so related to that, Amanda, I wanted to ask, what is a death doula, and who are you helping? Are you helping the people who are dying, or are you helping their loved ones? How does it work?
Well, it's both really. I mean, I actually hate the word doula. A friend of mine said, "Do you know what doula means?" And I said, "I don't actually." And she said it means a Greek servant. I said, "Oh, maybe I need to think about that." So I've put on my LinkedIn end of life consultant. That sounded better.
end of life midwife.
Yeah, but even then, I don't know. That doesn't sit well with me. I kind of like, I guess end of life guide maybe might be a good way of.
That sounds good.
It does, doesn't it? End of life guide, because it's like you're sort of guiding people to the death that they want, and or the sort of circumstances in which they are wanting to die. I had a text from my a friend of mine who, I get people texting me all their death stories if they go well, and somebody was texting me about their nan who died beautifully. Actually, it was really beautiful to hear it. She said she wanted to die like the Queen, surrounded by her family, and she wanted Nat King Cole playing, and my friend went and held her hand and sang a song that she used to sing her when she was little. And she said, "Amanda, it was such a beautiful death. I felt so honoured to have been able to help facilitate that death with Nanny, but also Nan had told them what she wanted beforehand." And I think that's really, really important to verbalize these conversations, you know, now, because you just don't know when you might have your loved one have to plan a funeral. And I think there's a lot of guilt around not knowing what people want. So in answer to your question, Tim, yes, I work with helping to facilitate people being comfortable at the end of life, but also to be there when the family are sort of, you know, quite chaotic and they don't know what to do, they don't know what to say. But sometimes I remember in the hospice there was a man, he wasn't very well, he was dying, and his sister was like, what do I do, and I said, well, you know, what's he like, what is he like? And she said, well, he's very into nature. And I said, well, and she said he loves reading. And I said, well, find one of his favorite books and maybe you can sit and read it to him. Or, you know, there are some nice nature apps, maybe you can play some streams running. And, you know, you have to really think about what that person what they liked, you know, what gives them comfort in their life. And I guess it's knowing people really well. But if you don't know people really well, it's saying, you know, what would work for you? Do you get cold? Would you like to be kept warm? You know, my mum's got very sensitive skin. I know that she's going to want soft blankets, and I know she's allergic to plasters. So it's just those tiny things that are really important to people and can really help. But I think just talking about things before you have to make those decisions is really, really important. And I think just having the skills as an end of life, you know, guide or dude or whatever they call me, I just wanted to be a bit more empowered to help other people to find a way through without feeling so much guilt and sorrow and sadness. I mean, yes, that sadness and sorrow is always going to be there, but if you can control the things you can control, and you can do that so that it's smooth, then those practical things are really important. My husband's a music composer actually, and randomly I got this conversation. Somebody rang me, and it was this woman, and she was in floods of tears, and she said, "Oh my God, I'm so glad I got hold of you. I'm trying to play this piece of music that was written by your husband." And it was a VW advert, and it was a really beautiful piece of music actually. It was about a father and a daughter, and they're buying a polo for her to go to uni. And she said, my mum, years ago, she said my mum saw that advert and said, I want that piece of music played at my funeral. And she said it was the only thing she'd ever talked about in terms of her funeral. And she said, and she's died, and I don't know what else she would have wanted, but I do know that she wanted that piece of music. So she said, do I have permission to use it? And I said, absolutely. And I can get my husband to do a remix it for you if you want, you know. So he did a longer version for her to play at the service, and she was so grateful. I mean, the relief that she had, that she knew that her mum would have that, was beautiful. And you know, it made me really think about, well, at least she could do something that she knew her mum would want.
It feels, well, I mean, not just because it's 10 to, but it feels like we're getting to that point where if you've got questions, throw them into the chat, because this is, we're sort of in the how do we support people through that end of life, either whether it's you caring for someone else or whether it's yourself, because it is a difficult time. It's you can tell from the crack in my voice, it's difficult for me even talking about it at the moment because it feels so raw. But I'm so grateful to I've taken so much from the conversations that I'm having with Mum at the moment, from the things I've read from both of your books. Actually, I've really taken a lot from it. So if there's anything that you wanted to ask either Amanda or Salena, do chip in the chat and ask away. So Amanda, what's your top tip for supporting someone who is trying to deal with supporting a loved one through the end of life? Well, you know, when you're the friend of someone who's dealing with it, how can you help? Because we want to, don't we?
Yeah, I think being present is the biggest thing that we learn in our training. Actually, we spent 3 days training to listen, which was quite interesting. How do we listen? How do we actively listen without talking over someone or butting in or trying to give advice or trying to solve someone's problem? You know, we can't solve someone going through the death of someone they love, but we can listen to them, and we could listen to maybe what they might need, try and deduce what they might need. And that might be making them some food, or picking up their child from school, or, you know, coming round and tidying up their house, or just offering a cup of tea and an ear, and just saying, you know, what do you need? You know, what do you need? You just want to talk about it. And sometimes not even talking, just being there and letting someone bawl their eyes out, or not say anything, just watch telly. I think being present, and whatever that means, and sometimes that's sitting with the uncomfortable. We talk about that a lot in our training, which is to sit with the uncomfortable, because it's important that we do, because we're not trained to deal with death, because we don't talk about it in Western society. So we sort of we have to learn on the hop when these things happen. And I think so the biggest advice for me from me is really just to be present and gentle with a listening ear, and being in tune with that person and thinking, I wonder what they might need, and then say to them, what do you need? What could I do? And they might just say, well, there's nothing you can do, but actually just even hearing me is enough.
I think the best advice, if you're dying or if you're planning to die one day, is to unclutter, declutter. I think that's the best thing that I heard. I read that in my friend Rue Callender's book, and it was like, of course, that would be the best thing that you could do for your family and friends, is not have loads and loads and loads of absolute crap for them to sort out. So yeah, so I've been really mindful about that. I mean, books, I can't. I mean, yeah, they're going to have a lot of books to sort out, but yeah, no, I think that's really important to sort of get rid of all that clutter, because yeah, I remember when my grandparents died, it was just so harrowing. We had to do the whole house. There's so much stuff to go through, just years of it, decades of stuff. Yeah. Anyway, that's what that made me think of. Yeah.
But it's weird though, isn't it? Because stuff becomes freighted with meaning. We can't bring the meaning into conversation. So often we lock it onto a thing instead. And when what we wanted to say becomes why it's important that we keep this thing. It's we're strange, repressed beings, aren't we? Really. There's a lovely question from Louisa. Do you feel that psychedelic therapy can play a role in how we face the end of life and learn to connect and let go? She said, "Thank you."
Definitely, definitely. It's something I'm really interested in actually. I don't know if you're familiar with BJ Miller. He's like a sort of death guru, hot superstar palliative care consultant, and he talks a lot about psychedelics and the use of psilocybin mushrooms in end of life care. And there's been some amazing studies with people who have cancer, you know, who are terminally ill or living with, well, people prefer to say living with a life-limiting illness. And yeah, psilocybin is an experimental thing at the moment, where they you know, I think also in Europe it's a lot bigger, and in South Africa, where they're giving, you know, they're doing tests with mushrooms, and in Australia, and people are doing sort of these death meditations, and the psilocybin helps you almost sort of release and experience a sort of energetic death. And people have found that that has been incredible in terms of losing or helping to accept death and the fear of death. So I think that's going to be definitely something in the future that's going to, and I'd love to see more trials around, definitely around that. So I think and also some of the doulas that I'm aware of are doing experimenting with virtual reality with people in hospices, where they're going in with sort of virtual reality headsets. And actually my husband's been doing some music with David Attenborough. He's been doing these sort of meditations through these sort of jungles and beautiful places, where, you know, it helps deal with pain relief actually, and stress and anxiety around death. So that's another thing that's, I think, could be amazing if we could look at that. You know, if you think about the power of meditation anyway. But I mean, some people older people who don't really know about meditation, they get like a VR headset, and it's transformative. There's a film being made about it at the moment, which we might be involved with, and I'm really fascinated by how that might progress as well. So there's loads of really interesting things as a community of end of life doulas that we talk about and we explore and we try and learn a bit more about, because I think it's important to know what's out there and what might be coming to help us deal with it in a you know, in an interesting way, in a creative way, in a therapeutic way. And I think that will just grow as we move forward. I really hope so anyway. So I think that's why it's really good keeping this conversation going, because out of those conversations become new concepts and new trials and anything that we can do really. So that's a really good question. Thank you.
I think it fits in with we do seem to, we've talked in this conversation about how we've moved away from rituals and talking about death, but I think we're starting as a society to realize that we've lost those connections which nourish us, and are starting to find new ways to bring them back, like psychedelics and lots of other stuff. Thanks, Paul, for referencing the Swedish death cleaning. Very good. That'll stick with me for the decluttering. Well, guys, it's 8 o'clock. It's been a fabulous conversation. Thank you so much. I managed to get through without crying, which is amazing. So I'm really pleased about that. I've not shared too much of my own sad experience at the moment. So it's been a joy. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you both. Thanks for the conversation, but more importantly, thanks for the books, and thanks for that ripple out. Salena, I've just got to ask, is Mrs. Death, is it going to appear on our screens? Is that the plan?
Yeah, it's on its way. Idris Elba has the film rights with his company Green Door Pictures, and so it'll be coming soon. I don't really know much, but there's news on the way. But yeah, it's going on, but I don't really know much more than that, or I can't really say much more than that. I'm trying to be vague as possible.
No, well, I'm sure we're all looking. We're all
busy working on the second book. That's going to be coming out with Canongate. The next book, which so there's more coming from Mrs. Death as well. Yeah, and her sister Life, and Time, and Hope, and all these other characters that I've been writing.
And Amanda, you're working on virtual reality meditations with David Attenborough. I mean,
yes. Well, I connected with this amazing woman called Sheila Popper, who's like this researcher with virtual reality, and she's developed this meditation with Richard Attenborough. Actually, she just wrote to him and said, "Would you narrate these pieces of meditation that I've put together?" And he just agreed. She couldn't believe it. She was just like completely blown away. He did it voluntary for nothing, and they're fantastic. So then she asked if my husband would do the music for them, and I was like, yeah. So they're beautiful, they're really nice. So so I'm really enjoying experimenting with that as well. It's just good fun, and it's nice to do something that's really helpful. And I'm writing a fiction book as well, which is very exciting. Yeah. Not that I've ever written fiction, so that'll be an interesting one. But we'll see. But around the idea of death and life as well. So watch this space. So, yeah, all very exciting.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, both. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
See you again in 2 weeks' time. We're back a little earlier next month, talking about who make and making a living. So see you on is it the 14th? 2 weeks' time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.